everyone. Welcome to this online conversation on processing trauma in communities of color caused by racism in all its forms. My name is Stacy Stowe. I am the Director of the Office of Equity and Engagement with the City of Grand Rapids, and I will be co-moderating with my colleague and strategic thought partner, Mr. Brandon Davis, the Director of the City's Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. Racism has a direct impact on our health. Mental, physical, spiritual, it impacts all of that in every aspect of our lives. Infant mortality, educational experiences and outcomes, healthcare, criminal justice, wealth gaps, and just so much more, pretty much every aspect of our life. We also know that the mental health system, as with many systems, are not equitable. They're far from being equitable, fully accessible, and are often not holistic or culturally responsive to the needs of the communities of color. We're having this conversation today to support normalizing talking about mental health, to see the signs of traumas in ourselves and in those we love, to provide very specific resources and strategies to address trauma, and to leverage and share the wisdom of the panel we have for you today, and also the community that will be participating who has opportunity to also share resources. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the need for mental health and wellness support among communities of color who are disproportionately exposed to the virus for several reasons, with the underlying theme of those reasons being racism. We are literally losing loved ones, and because of preventative funeral protocols, we're not able to gather and mourn as we're accustomed to do. And so that's just one of the many examples of why we're here today. I'd like to offer the mic, so to speak, to Brandon Davis, my colleague.
Thank you, Ms. Stowe. Seeing images that reflect us, Black and Latino bodies being brutalized and being traumatized and even murdered before and during this time, like on social media, it's horrific. It's triggering. It's infuriating, to say the least. And recent events around this country with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we've received requests from mental health professionals of color, by friends, family, community, staff, particularly Black staff, asking how do we deal with this trauma and how do we process this? So today's conversation is important. And we hope that those who are watching via Facebook or YouTube or however you're watching today learn new skills and strategies to identify how to process this trauma. And we hope that through hearing from our mental health experts today, you're able to share what you learn with others as well. Before we introduce our panelists, we like to thank our colleagues, and that's Janelle Dixon and Lilybeth Perez, Katie Carpenter, Clarissa Novak, Doug Stark, our 311 staff and our communication staff, and many others for helping organize this important community conversation. And yes, I read the list, so I wouldn't miss anyone, but we're really grateful. So today's panelists include Luana Abreu, and we won't do their bios right now, but we'll let them tell a little bit about themselves. Dr. Lennox Forrest, Monica Johnson, Samuel Jones, and Kirby Killingham. Thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to have you with us today. And I'll turn it back to Ms. Stout. She'll tell us a little bit about how the event's going to run.
Yeah, so the flow for today's conversation is we will ask the panelists a few questions to get started and then take questions from the community. You can ask your questions by calling 311 or 616-456-3000 or writing your question in the comments of this video that is being live streamed off the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability's Facebook page. And so we have colleagues that are collecting those questions that we can ask the panelists. So please feel free to do that. We also have a bilingual staff person that can receive those questions written or by calling in Spanish as well. Also, community, if you know of local wellness experts of color and or culturally responsive resources to promote wellness and trauma resources as well, whether it is articles, podcasts, websites, and more, please share that information in the comments of the videos for others to see and possibly leverage on their journey as well. And so we have amazing wisdom on the panel today, and we know that there's a lot of wisdom and expertise in the community. And so let's really come together and share those resources. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Lily Perez, who will present in Spanish to help our Spanish-speaking community also know how to ask questions and access this information. Lily?
Thank you, Stacy. Buenas tardes, comunidad. Si necesita servicios de interpretación para dirigirse al panel de terapista y hacer una pregunta, estaré disponible para ayudarle. Puede marcar el 311 o el 616-456-3000 y ahí puede oprimir la opción 1 para hacer una pregunta. Si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, puede encontrar el link hacia abajo en los comentarios. Está fijado y ahí lo llevará a YouTube para hacer su pregunta. Good evening, community. If you need interpretation services to address the panel and ask a question, I will be able to assist. Please dial 616-456-3000 or 311. If you'd like to hear this meeting in Spanish, you are also welcome to click the link pinned below, and it'll direct you over to YouTube where the meeting will be interpreted in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. She will also be sharing that information in the comments of the Facebook page and also the link. So there'll be more access to that information. So I think at first, we're going to have a community conversation. Let's get to know the community, the panelists here today. And so I think we'll just start out with just introductions. And so we'll go Dr. Forrest and then Luana. And then, so we'll do Dr. Forrest, Luana, Kirby, Monica, and then Samuel. So we'll go in that order. So Dr. Forrest, just a little bit about yourself. You're out. There you go.
As a panelist. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been practicing in Grand Rapids for 20 years. I see individual clients. I see couples. I also see family. I see children. And I do some consulting in the community and also some psychological testing and assessments.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest, for being here. Luana?
Hello, everyone. My name is Laina Abreu. I am a temporary limited license psychologist, and I specialize with working with individuals of colors, especially with Latinx communities.
Thank you so much. Mr. Killingham? You're on mute, Mr. Killingham.
I am a professional counselor here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Currently working for Family Outreach Center and the United States Department of Justice Office for Victims' Crimes and the city of Grand Rapids. Currently, I am still working at Family Outreach Center, but now we do work with United Way of West Michigan in the city of Grand Rapids. A lot of the work that I do specifically is targeted around young men of color between the ages of 14 and 24 who've been impacted by violence. A lot of times I facilitate trauma-focused CBT groups with a strong emphasis on victimization and becoming a survivor instead of victim or person that retaliates. And then I also do a lot of individual family work. So yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this event.
Thank you, Mr. Kellerman. Thank you for the work that you do. Next is Monica Johnson.
Hi, my name is Monica. I currently work at Clínica Santa Maria, and I currently work with children, teens, and adults. I am also working with Daisy with the domestic violence groups on Monday nights at the clinic. And we usually specialize more in DBT, CBT, and also trauma-focused CBT. Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Last but not least, Mr. Samuel Jones.
Hey, you all. My name is Samuel Jones. I am a limited licensed professional counselor. My practice is called the Wisdom Center Counseling Services, where we're supporting often people of color and individuals from marginalized communities, no matter what walk you come from. You know, our goal is to really support the family, and organizations that we've worked with are HQ of Grand Rapids 311 Youth Housing, in addition to Department of Health and Human Services, where we're here to support you.
Thank you so much. So that was our warm up. Wasn't really a question. So I'll start out with the first question, and then Mr. Davis and I will rotate back and forth. Meanwhile, community, please ask those questions that you want to know around trauma in community of colors, how we address it, solutions and ideas. We'd love to hear your questions. And so please call those in and write them in the comments. And so I'll get started. I think I'll start with Mr. Killingham. The question is, what are the subtle and often not so subtle, signs in a person that may indicate they have experienced or are currently experiencing trauma as it relates to racism and systemic oppression. And I know that you work with youth, so if there is a difference on how we might see this in young people versus adults, if you could share that with us. And then I think I'm going to ask from your perspective as well, Luana, after Mr. Killingham.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of some of the symptomology that we see is a lot of aggression. It's a lot of isolation, a lot of loneliness, a lot of despair, and a lot of confusion. Before I really get into that, or Miss Luana goes on, I kind of want to preface this conversation. If we really don't acknowledge the cumulative trauma that's taking place from a historical perspective and a vicarious perspective, I think we're going to be cheating ourselves. So when we work with these clients and we have people calling in today, I hope that we understand that these people or the people that they are close to are affected from a multiple systems perspective. So when we're dealing with trauma, those are some of the basic symptomologies. But a lot of times when people do have that aggression, people do have a lot of that despair, loneliness, isolation, frustration, even flashbacks and nightmares. It also stems from generational transferring from parents and grandparents. It also is a transferring of trauma from a societal perspective as well. So when we look at that, we have to understand that when we're treating people, because if we just go off of maybe just a DSM-5 symptomology tree of what, a person could be diagnosed as, I think we're going to be cheating ourselves and we're going to be cheating that individual. I wanted to also preface that statement because when we talk about white privilege and we talk about the other side of racism, I think those individuals who might have benefited from the perpetrators in the victimization process that we call racism, they have to also be cognizant of what's going on too and be honest with themselves. So I hope that answered your question, but definitely negative effect, aggressiveness, loneliness, isolation, feelings of helplessness too. A lot of times you see that more so in females. And it's a lot more internalizing. And when we begin to act out or we have maladaptive behavior, a lot of times that internalizing can be more self-harming to them instead of maybe a young man acting out on someone else.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And thank you for the context. Ms. Abreu? You're on mute. We don't want to miss your wisdom. You're on mute.
No? Yes,
we can hear you. We can hear you. There's a slight delay when you mute and unmute. So just, yeah.
I'm going along with what Mr. Killingham was saying. Also, a lot of the symptoms can show up very physical rather than just, the anger. It can also be like depression. You can have also physical symptoms as like headache, chest pain, body pain, especially among the Latinx population. Oftentimes we show symptoms of mental health through our body. And I have a lot of clients that often complain about having headaches and having pain, and those are signs of depression. It's just that they don't know how to verbalize that, or they don't know what depression is at the time. And along with racism, there's a lot of triggering going on while, like, in social media and all the pictures that we see, the videos that we're seeing, even if we feel like that we might not have had before, like racism or discrimination against us, by seeing those images, we can re-trigger ourselves and bring past trauma and past racism and discrimination that we had before. So just also that's something to keep in mind, that we can get re-triggered by the stuff that we see in social media, reading posts. So, and also keep in mind physical health, all of those signs that might show up, not just anger and depression, not just those symptoms, but also physical symptoms as well.
Thank you. Just to dive a little deeper on that question before I hand it to Mr. Davis, with youth, what might that look like with youth? What might youth say? And this could be for Monica or Sam or Dr. Forrest. I know you work with young folks as well. So I have a young person, 11 or 13. What, as a mom, what might I hear, because like right now, my 11-year-old sleeps all the time. So I'm like, is she depressed or is she going through a growth stage? And so what are some youth specific signs that I might see as a parent, we might see as a parent? Anyone want to raise your hand and then I'll call you? We'll go with.
Stacey, I think you were muted, but let's go with Monica. Is that all right?
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Okay. So one thing that I see with youth is a lot of impulsive behaviors. You do see sometimes you hear a lot of the mothers or parents say, oh, my kid just wants to be stuck in their room. They don't want to be bothered. They're stuck to their phone. So you do see a lot of the isolation. A lot of the teens also say, like, I just feel lonely, I'm bored, I'm tired. Lack of motivation is one of the main things that you see a lot with the kids that are going through depression. With a lot of the anxiety, you see the irritability. When you call them, like, hey, come and eat. I don't want to eat right now. I'll come later. Or, can you help me do this? I'm not in the mood right now. So you'll see the impulsive snaps of just like not wanting to listen. But a lot of number one thing is lack of motivation.
Thank you all so much. Brandon?
Thank you. So, I don't want to, presume that everyone even understands the difference between trauma and vicarious trauma and what that means. So maybe Dr. Forrest, could you tell us a little bit about what trauma is and what vicarious trauma is? And then as a follow-up to that, I'm interested in knowing, is it possible to heal from trauma caused by racism?
Vicarious trauma is what we would consider indirect trauma or secondary trauma. So the person doesn't actually experience it firsthand, but they might experience it by watching, by reading a story, by watching something on television. So they get exposed to the trauma vicariously. So it's indirect. Sometimes it's also used interchangeably with secondary trauma. So it happens to the person indirectly through exposure, once again, to media, graphic or disturbing images, stories conveyed to them secondhand.
Thank you. So if we're just talking about things we've seen recently, that would be like the murder of George Floyd, right? So individuals watching the murder of George Floyd and that horrific event could experience trauma associated with just from seeing that. Is that what you're explaining, Dr. Forrest?
That's exactly what I'm saying, because the incident with George Floyd, that was horrific. We saw a graphic detail of someone dying, human suffering, person was struggling for his life. So that would cause vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. Just witnessing an event such as that, so graphic, that can trigger other things in a person based on being exposed to that particular graphic footage.
Mr. Killingham, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I believe this to stay in line and not step out of bounds. Didn't I believe Monica, did she want to chime in before I comment on what Dr. Forrest said in the question? No? Yeah, sorry. But vicarious trauma also, and thank you, Dr. Forrest. I couldn't have said it better myself. But when we talk about trauma or any type of anxiety, anxiolytic disorder, it's almost hyper arousal or a hypo arousal. Hyper arousal is more of the generalized symptomology that we see where we have the aggressiveness and things like that. But when we have hypo arousal, a lot of times people can become very numb and insensitive to a situation like George Floyd. And again, I want to preface saying that because I believe in situations like this, a lot of white Americans, when they see situations like George Floyd, they are very hypo aroused or numb to this pandemic, just like some African American and Latino people are. I remember as a young man, I saw this with Rodney King. And when I saw George Floyd murdered, this honestly had a flashback of 1996 when Rodney King was being assaulted by police officers. So for us, we have seen this, Blacks, whites, and Latinos, and everybody else that makes up this great country. We've seen this before. It's just a matter of, when we talk about vicarious trauma, is it an issue of you becoming numb and we pretty much just let, as we say, business as usual continue to be conducted? Or do we become overly aroused and we're aggressive and angry and we lash out? The thing that's dangerous about trauma is that it blocks our reasoning in our prefrontal cortex. So we can't even think rationally. So when we're lashing out or we're hyper aroused, a lot of times that harm that we're doing is self-inflicting to ourselves or our very, very close immediate community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Stacey?
Okay. So really understanding, thank you for explaining what trauma is and vicarious trauma. And so really, is it possible? So we're here talking about processing and healing from trauma with the assumption that that's possible. Is it possible to heal from trauma? Right? We're making it. That was a big exhale, Mr. Killingham. I'll go with Mr. Killingham, and then Samuel, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
As therapists, I don't think anyone on this panel would say that it's not possible to heal from trauma. I personally have seen people who have very traumatizing, victimizing past or stories become, as what we say in this world of social work, psychology, counseling, back into that window of tolerance, where those triggers or some of those experiences that they experienced a year, 5, 10 years ago are not as debilitating or as hurtful. So yes, the answer is it's possible. Now, on a deeper level, when I prefaced this whole panel conversation and I requested that we do look at generational trauma and historical trauma and vicarious trauma, there is still a community out here that thinks that this situation is not bad. And the reason why they think the situation is not bad is because we have another term, what we call finality, equifinality and multifinality. Myself, this panel, we all have made it to a somewhat sustainable and comfortable lifestyle. But if I asked everyone here, we all would probably have a story to tell as far as, the things that we had to overcome. So even though we overcame it, compared to some of our white counterparts, we probably had to work 3 times as hard to get there. That is traumatizing by itself. So, but to answer your question, that is evidence that it is possible. However, are we really traumatized still in the aftermath of what we went through compared to maybe a white counterpart? So, yes, we believe it, but what does true health really look like when we also know on the other end, when I just kind of gave that whole Rodney King analogy, there are people that are still numb to this. And when we come out of our homes and we're trying to live our best lives, they are triggering us through a lot of systematic racism, a lot of microaggressions that can easily give us, that feeling of despair or deflatedness as well.
Thank you. It's definitely not a yes or no answer, right? There's so many layers. And how do you heal from trauma when we keep getting triggered with trauma, with racism everywhere you look? So I feel that. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, what I'll say to that is the question was, can we heal from trauma? And like Kirby said, I believe we can. In that, though, here's an important approach to this. While we all on this panel are in some way, shape, or form trauma informed, we also have to be healing centered. And what I mean by that is that as therapists, it takes a community of focus on healing to really help understand how to heal trauma. And that means that we're talking about your therapist or the person that you're engaging with. We're talking about your mentor or someone that you can rely on because you trust them. We're talking about your family members who are around you and always giving messaging to you that can be negative or positive. And then we're talking about internally what you believe, what you think, how you feel, what you've experienced, and continually perpetually hearing that message and or hearing a message that can be healing. And so, yes, we can heal, but I think what we have to take into consideration is that what we're continually, perpetually talking about and saying is going to be the over alarming, arching message in what we're saying. And so if we don't just focus on trauma, but also focus on, hey, you know what? How can you tell me your story, and how can I help you with your story in a sense of engaging it from a place of healing focus, and healing is centered engagement, as opposed to just you're traumatized or just you're marginalized. Those things are really important when we're talking about this concept of giving healing.
Thank you. I love that aspect of reclaiming our story, right? And we're not a single story, none of us, right? It's multi-layered. I saw Luana, you had a comment?
No. Going along with what Samuel was saying, can we heal? Yes, but with trauma, the thing with trauma is that you just never know when you're going to be re-triggered, or when something in your lifespan is going to happen that's going to take you back to that event that traumatized you. So I think a lot has to do with how are you coping? What are you using in order to cope when you do get triggered again? Because it's, it's ongoing, it's always going to be happening, especially now in the times that we're living when it comes to racism. So focusing, yes, we can heal, but also in that healing, what am I using? What tools am I using in order to cope when I'm getting triggered, or when I'm seeing my peers getting triggered, or my family, or X, Y, and Z, how are we engaging in trauma? How are we communicating with others? And how am I taking care of myself to make sure that I'm good and I'm not getting re-triggered or going back to square one, if that makes sense?
Thank you. So, as I'm listening to the responses, I start thinking, like, I'm sure we all have stories, right? And the people who are watching today all have stories and can think of an event that has been traumatic in their life. I think a common theme, like as a young, not so young anymore, but as a professional of color, right? I constantly have been able to think about the level of privilege I have when I appear in a professional setting, right? The respect that's garnered when I'm wearing my suit, and I'm in a boardroom. I'm one of the good ones, right? But after work, when I'm in my car in my hoodie, which is usually how I would dress, it's a different experience, and that could be traumatizing, right? It could be, it has that type of impact that, not everyone, not especially people who are not Black people or not people of color, white people don't experience that in the same way. But when I can recognize the trauma, and I'm sure some of the people watching can recognize that I had the experience, but what do I do about it? Right. So really there's the question, I think, is what do we do with it once I recognize it? What's the first step that we take to try to heal in that regard? And maybe we could turn to Monica first, and hear your thoughts.
Well, one of the things that I usually do, and I work with a lot of the Hispanic, Latino community, and that was one of the fears that we had when immigration was out, and they were not coming to the clinic to their appointments because they were the fear of being pulled over or being asked, do they have a license? Do they have any type of verification ID stating that they're allowed to be here? And so I think a lot of the times it's just educating our clients on their rights, and also just knowing, like, a lot of the youth when they're out, they say, well, I don't like going down this street because I know the cops are out, or I don't like going out past 10 o'clock. My windows are tinted, they might pull me over. But just educating our youth and letting them know that they need to learn to be safe, and learn, that to go where they're going to be safe, and, to also be around of their surroundings, be always aware of what's around you. And then also, like I tell a lot of my women, like, go and choose, don't ever be alone, but just being aware of your surrounding and trying to be safe.
Dr. Forrest, do you have any thoughts? Thank you, Monica.
So the question is, what can we do? I think one of the things that we have to do is be self-aware of what is happening with us internally. We have to examine our feelings, how we appraise the situation. And we have to ask ourselves, is trauma running your life versus are you running your life and the trauma occurred? So you acknowledge that this situation occurred. And if you need to unravel the story, the situation, then maybe you seek professional help to give you some guidance in regards to that. And then accept your reaction as being normal. Because one of the things about trauma is that our response to it is unique and it's individually based. So how I experience trauma may be very different from the next person. Then you have to recognize and accept your emotional reaction to it. Because there will be a reaction because you have been destabilized. So there's going to be feelings of anger, resentment, guilt, self-depreciation, all of that. And your worldview will come into question because now you're wondering, is this world a safe place? You've been traumatized, you feel helpless. So just be very, very aware of all the feelings and the thoughts that might surface as a result of that. And then you can begin to reevaluate what your dreams are, what your goals are, despite this traumatic experience. And then realize that the trauma may never entirely go away, but you will be able to manage it. And it can have a lasting effect upon your life. However, you still have some things that you can control and still function effectively despite the traumatic experience.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest. I think we'll start with you because you mentioned there's a point, is trauma running your life or are you running your life? And the next question was, at what point should people seek out mental health support from a trained professional, right? There's a lot we can do for our mental health on our own. Is that the point where it shifts from, okay, this meditation, this reflection journals, all this isn't working for me? At what point do you recommend someone go to a trained professional? So we'll start with Dr. Forrest and the Mr. Killingham.
Okay. I would say that when you're assessing yourself, and obviously when we look to assess ourselves, we can't do a very good job. But let's say you have a job, but now you can't go to work. You're calling in sick. That's something significant because now you're not functioning as you used to. You might want to have no contact with anyone. So you are isolating yourself. You might be using drugs to cope with the situation. So when behaviors become abnormal for you, then that might be the time to seek help because you're behaving very, very differently. And now this situation is beginning to control your life.
Thank you so much. Mr. Killingham?
Yes, just for clarification, the question was, what are some of the cues that are indicators that a person might need professional help with some of the trauma they've experienced? Is that correct?
That's correct, because a lot of the different signs, I can see that in a lot of folks. Not everyone's seeing therapists. At what point is there a recommendation that, okay, you really need to go see someone?
Again, let me preface again. But when we talk about the human being, we all understand that there's different lifespans that we all live in. We have toddler or baby, and we have child, and we have a teenager, and then we have young adults, and we have older adults, and we have our seniors. I have found that middle generation, that teenage generation, that young adult generation, especially have negative stigmas when it is associated with mental health, especially in communities of color. If you do go and you visit a therapist, whether it's a psychologist or it's a social worker or a counselor, people that you have severe schizophrenic hearing voice type of issues. And that's not always the case. Now, also, I've heard a lot of the people on the panel constantly use the word safe. So when you have a family member that could really benefit from professional help, outside of that demographic that I said has a negative stereotype, we have to come in a safe and a non-judgmental way. Those cues are some of the symptomologies that we talked about earlier that are indicators that a person needs some professional help, but we have to come in a very safe and a non-judgmental way. On the other side of the coin, well, how do you get those teenagers and how do you get those young adults to seek out professional services when they need it? A lot of times it's almost best to come at them maybe using examples of people similar to them or that they relate to who also receive professional help. I love how the NBA and NFL players are now coming out and talking about depression, and they're coming out and talking about being bipolar or having PTSD. So you can sit there and be like, well, hey, this person, it sounds like he has a lot of the same symptoms that you're going on. I wonder what he did. And then that can open up a conversation that, eventually will lead that young person to get professional help as well. But you really have to be trepidatious when you're dealing with that specific generation because of those negative stigmas. It's a view as weakness. And a lot of people don't want to come off and be that transparent right away, even if it's their mother. So that's my advice as far as how to get a person to seek professional help. Young people, of course, they really don't know the difference between having a conversation with a professional therapist or their parents. So that's easy. And definitely seniors as well. They're probably exhausted at 50, 60, 70 years old where they're like, you know what? Yes, I struggle with alcoholism because the police officer killed my brother in 1995. And I'm tired of, having issues. I got cirrhosis of the liver, et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to be transparent as well. But when we have that I don't know if it's even Generation X anymore or Generation Y, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. We have to be extra trepidatious when we deal with them.
What you just what you just said, I used to work with young people directly as a youth director, young Latino men transitioning away from gang affiliation, and they would say, Miss, I just want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about stuff. And I was like, okay, but I'm not trained to take on this, but they're like, but we want to talk with someone that gets it, that they don't have to share how you opened up with the backstory on racism or what it might be like to walk down the street as as a young Black or brown. I was working with boys at the time, a young Black or brown boy. So wanting to talk with someone, but wanting someone that reflects who they are. So I just wanted to say that kind of triggered that memory for me. Dr. Forrest.
I would like to touch on something that Kirby basically said. When it comes to counseling, it's never easy for African Americans to go to counseling because in our community, there's an impact in terms of our decision making when it comes to culture and norms. We're always reluctant to go to therapy because of the messages that we have received, such as going to the counseling, seeing a psychologist or a therapist is a sign of weakness. Going to see someone, we should be able to do it on our own. And in the African American community, there's the norm that you don't put your business out there on the street. Okay, so those things are barriers for us to go to see someone because that's not a conversation within our family circle. One of the things that a lot of patients will do for me is that they'll tell me about someone who they feel needs to see someone. So one of the things I tell them is bring them with you. Okay, so that's a good entry point because they will feel like they're being mentored and they will get to experience the process. And once they meet you and you can hopefully connect with them and engage with them, it will make a difference. This past week, a grandmother brought her two grandchildren to come and see me, and they just opened up. But in our society, there's a lot of negative stigma concerning seeing someone because the first thing that we hear is that, oh, you're crazy. And those types of messages will not allow people to move forward, especially with the norms that, you know what, this is something that white people do and it's a sign of weakness, etc., etc. So we have to be creative now about getting people to see someone.
There was a lot of body language of agreement with your fellow panelists when you were saying that. I see. So I want to hand it over to Brandon Davis, but I guess since we're on this topic, Brandon, if you don't mind, so you gave some strategies, which really go to the next. I guess I'm stealing your question, Brandon. Which really goes to the next. We're a team. We can do that. Because you said like going with someone. I hadn't thought about that. What you said resonates a lot in the community. I'm part of a Latino community, and we had similar conversations. Right? We don't go that way, or so I always try to just be really honest. Like, well, I see a therapist. Here's a recommendation. Like, oh, I love it. And just kind of like just normal, like, hey, I had this for dinner last night. Oh, I'm seeing my therapist tomorrow. Just to kind of normalize it, just like I do with my children. So you gave me a great parenting tip, Dr. Forrest. I bring my kids with me every time I vote to normalize voting. So I think talking about that with them early could be something. So I just wanted to give others a chance to chime in. And so, what are additional ways that we can encourage and support our loved ones to get counseling or therapy, and really give specific like phrases we could use or strategies that we could use? I'll start with Sam, and then I'll go to Luana and then Monica.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll echo everything that has been said so far. And you brought up an important point, Stacey. There's this aspect of modeling, which is really important, right? Role modeling, right? In the African American religious context, some cases parents will send their kids to a church before they ever go to a church. In some cases, you might have to, but in other cases, let's say you want to get your haircut as a guy, you're going to get your haircut by that barber first before you ever bring your kid there to make sure that they can actually cut your hair. So in the same way of that frame, it's important to take the opportunity to model to your kids. So, when I think about, some clients and individuals that I've worked with, I've always encouraged them to say, hey, just think about going to a therapist like you're getting a lineup. Like, that's my favorite phrase. I like to tell them, hey man, I'm about to get a mental lineup right quick. Like, and when I'm talking to my guys, they're like, mental lineup? Like, why would I do that? Well, it's important to do that because if you don't get your line straight, right? If you don't get your hair, the right product in your hair, like going to the barber or the hairdresser, in many cases, you don't feel the grace and the presence of being able to have that feeling when you walk out of that salon for the first time or you walk out of that barbershop. And so in the same way, if you can encourage your kids, your teens, someone that to go get that mental lineup or go get that mental hairdress, it's really important to talk about it from that frame as if it's things that people can relate to. Right. So that way it's like, oh, you know what? I'm about to go practice my free throws right quick on the court. Okay, I'm about to go practice making sure that I can understand what's going on internally with myself. Just like I'm on the court, I want to practice on the basketball court, make sure I got my dribbles down, make sure I got my layups in, right? All those different types of things. I think it's about using the same vernacular, the same thing that you know and understand in layman's terms, and just bringing the mental health standpoint to it, so that way we're normalizing the language, right? It's not this, ooky spooky type of stuff, right? See how I say ooky spooky? It's not ooky spooky. It's really important to just say, hey, you know what? I went to a therapist today, and you know what? I practiced on some skills and tools that I need to do to get better and to make myself better. It's just as simple as that. And so it really begins to be important when we're talking to whoever who has never been there, because in many cases I'm seeing first-time clients. I'm saying things like I'm talking about stuff they're talking about to make sure that we're not using huge language to make a really an important thing in our community that we need, just to make it really simple.
Love it. Love that example. Luana, then Monica.
Can you guys hear me? I just kind of want to touch base on what you mentioned before, especially with the Latinx community when it comes to therapy. People like Latinx communities tend to think of therapy. Oh, if you go to a therapist, you're crazy. People only go there because you're tuta loco and things like that, So the way that I do it, usually because I'm a therapist, even in my family, they want me to give them therapy. And I'm like, well, technically that's not even ethical, so I cannot do that. And I refer them and I normalize it. I love the wording that you use, because it's a matter of normalizing and making sure that we're not judging. that it is okay to seek therapy. And think about it. If you go to your family are not experts. They don't know what they're doing. If they don't know what depression is, what PTSD is, what schizophrenia is, so how can you rely on your family when they don't know how to help you either? So putting it like when you have cancer, you go to a doctor for help, right? You don't go to your family members as a doctor, right? So no, seriously, sometimes you have to like normalize and like give them like reality examples or like a reality check for them to know like you need help. So therefore, just like you go to a doctor for physical pain, you go to a therapist for mental, concerns. And also networking. To me, networking is so important because by word of mouth, you can help, at least in the Latinx community, that works a lot. If someone is like, oh, I'm seeing a therapist, she's amazing, she did this, and that person more than likely is going to reach out to the person and tell the other person, it's a chain effect, at least within my community. And also, again, it's just lifting each other up and being vulnerable and letting them know I go to therapy. I've done this. This has helped me. I wish you could go. I'll go with you. Or I'll let you know so and so went to see so and so. Do you want me to give her your number or his number so you can talk to them? Also, when you seek therapy, it's not a binding contract. You can go for one session, try them out, see if you like them, and if you don't have to stay with them. You can move on to the next one. So, but at least go. The first step is to at least go, see what it's about, and see if you're comfortable with that and with that person.
All right. We're actually, time's going so fast. Monica, we'll let you wrap up this question, and then I'll give it over to Brandon. And then, Brandon, we have some questions coming in from the community, and then we're almost out of time. So, Monica?
Hi. I think just like what the other panelists had mentioned is just trying to normalizing it, being patient. I know, especially with youth, especially like even with your own children, sometimes you see this anger in them, and sometimes they're not able to talk to you. And, you always let them know, like, well, hey, if you want to talk about me, you can go talk to this therapist. If it's something about me, it's something that's going on. I do agree with sometimes family members, they will want to come to you like, hey, you're a therapist, you can help me out. But I always let them know, I was like, no, it's better to talk to somebody else because, I don't want you to feel like, I'm judging you or thinking that I'm going to go say something. Because, with the Hispanic community, one of the things is like, they're going to be chismosos. They're going to go tell my business. So one of the things I always let a lot of the youth and with my family members is just like, hey, go talk to somebody that might understand you. And, like, hey, if you want to go talk about what's going on, just let it out there and then you can come back. And I always tell them, I was like, it's just like, when you go shopping, like go test, test the therapist. And if you don't like them, then go on to the next one. But I do like to refer people that I think might engage well with them, because I think being able to engage with them and understand their culture is a big thing. That's one of the main things that I do have a lot is just like, well, I'm not going to go see that therapist because they're not going to understand where I'm coming from. So just being able to be patient and support them and then help guide them into the right therapist.
Thank you. Brandon?
Great. Thanks, everyone. So we did get a couple questions from community, so I will just ask a few of those. One of the questions asked specifically about slave disorder, and the question is, are experts aware that people suffer from PTSD by way of slave disorder? And if so, what type of treatment should people seek? And I would ask, what is slave disorder, right? I'll start there because I would need that foundation before the rest of the question. So maybe we will start with Dr. Forrest.
Okay. I think the person who called in is maybe talking about PTSD, which is post-traumatic slave disorder. Okay. So that comes about as a result of the historical underpinnings of this country in terms of African Americans and Caucasians. The slave, obviously, the African American. The slave owner, once again, the dominant culture or the white person. So that looks as if things are still going on in terms of slavery for a lot of African Americans, because they feel that what has been played out in history is still occurring, in the sense that, and I'll use this image with George Floyd, the police officer on his neck for a lot of African Americans, they feel that that's a microcosm of what is continuing to take place in society, where African Americans are powerless, and we have to bend the knee to white America. So I think that's what that person is calling about.
Thank you for that, and maybe we'll ask that. Oh, go ahead, Kirby.
Yes, thank you. Just to add to what Dr. Forrest said with the PTSD, a lot of times when you talk about post-traumatic slavery disorder, or you talk about a post-traumatic stress disorder, in 2020, I think it's fair to say, take the P off, because it's not post, it's every day still. And just because a person had a traumatic experience 20 years ago, that it might have put them in a powered down or inferior position, they are still reinforced every single day, 365, 24/7, that they are supposed to be an inferior person. But you can just take the post off. Now, with that being said, the best remedy, a lot of times, like they said, are mindfulness activities, somatic releasing activities, and exercise. Because when you are traumatized and you have that experience, a lot of times that cortisol that's released in our midbrain or our amygdala, pituitary gland, I'm not a scientist, but when that cortisol is released, a lot of times it calcifies our brains. So when we have that fight, flight, or freeze response from a slave disorder, a lot of times it's freeze or fight, and then, somebody else has vicarious trauma because they've seen you being lynched, and then they are victims of slave disorder as well. It almost calcifies your thinking or your brain to almost stay stuck in that frightful or helpless state that you were when you first experienced it. So here it is 20 years later, you still have that inferiority complex because you never took in the time to talk to somebody or really, readjust that cortisol release that calcified your brain 20 years ago to think that you're inferior. So exercise, everybody.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. One of the comments that is coming through is someone said that, when I encounter people that are reluctant to go to therapy, I tell them that therapists give them a space to verbally vomit and not worry about having to have dinner with that person again. And I thought that was a pretty cool way to think about it, right? Everyone needs that place you could just let it all go. Stacey?
Yes. Thank you so much. And so we talked about, I'm skipping here, it's in here somewhere, but because now it's kind of like the clock's ticking, so I want to make sure we get so many for those that have never gone. And so we talked to them about getting mentally lined up. We talked to them about the verbal vomit, all of that, right? And so we got them to go. What for people that haven't gone before, what does counseling look like? What does it involve? And I like that Luana mentioned that you can go, and if you aren't feeling this person, you can kind of shop around, like Monica said. But what does it look like when you first go? Walk me through a first session. What should I expect as a first timer? We'll go with Samuel.
Sure. So this can be stylistic, but I think all of us would say in some shape or way that we're building rapport. Meaning that first time, we're just getting ready to get a chance to know who you are and for you to get a chance to know who we are, so that way that there's some level of comfortability. I think it's difficult for that first time you're sitting across from someone that has no idea what's going on in your life. Right. And so it would be wrong for me as a therapist to assume that I know anything about what's happening. So really, it begins to be some level of conversation about, just tell me a little bit about you. Not necessarily about what you're dealing with, not necessarily about all the intricacies of those things going on in your thought process or your behaviors. Just tell me about you. Just tell me about how your day was. Just tell me about, how you're feeling right now. Because I think that it's important to really understand who this person is. And also for me to do a little bit of self-disclosure. We talk about in therapy not to do too much self-disclosure. Throw it out the house. I'm going to tell you a story about myself too. So that way, in some way, shape, or form, you feel comfortable with me. So that way you can make the decision if I'm the right person or not. That's typically on the first session.
I love it. So kind of building rapport and getting a feel. So Monica, as you answer this question, as far as what that's like, could you also let us know, is it true that to go to counseling, you always got to lay on a couch? Right. So really walk us through that first day and maybe bust any myths that are out there. Thank you.
Well, not at my office, no couch. But I do feel like even like with even like your first group therapy session, I think a lot of it is just, again, building rapport and knocking down like some bridges where some people might think like it's just me that feels this way, no one else feels this way. I think also like self-disclosure helps out a lot, but individually, especially like with the youth, there's a lot of asking questions. I sometimes will play a game with them, and then just trying to like build their rapport, get their comfort level. I have slime, stress balls, just anything, because a lot of times when you have children that are usually 7 and up, they're a little nervous, they're moving their hands around, or they're playing with their hair, or I don't know, I'm fine. So just being able to at least build some type of rapport and make them feel safe and at least supportive while they're in session with you. But like I said, the first session is usually talking, asking questions, and I'm right up front with them, just like, hey, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I don't know anything about you. You're just coming in here. We're just going to get to know one another. A lot of times they're like, well, do you have kids? What are your kids like? And, and I do some self-disclosure, like, hey, like sometimes my kids, they get on my nerves too. It's something that's normal with a lot of parents, but just trying to normalize and make them feel comfortable during the first session.
Thank you. Back to you, Brandon.
I lost my mouse for a second. I got nervous. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about workplace trauma and just acknowledge that, for a lot of Black and brown people, especially, and not only Black and brown people, but, they don't have the luxury of saying, I feel traumatized at work, or my coworkers are causing this trauma that I'm experiencing, and therefore I'm going to leave this job, right? And the same would be true for others that are in a lower socioeconomic status, or don't have the same ability to just jump to another job, especially in times like this during the pandemic. What do? Right? You can't just leave your job. You have to take care of your family, but the source of what brings that trauma back on, or causes you to experience or flash back to it, is at your job. What do we do? And maybe we will start with Kirby.
Thank you. A lot of times when people are at work and they're experiencing traumatizing events, the best thing to do is not quit your job. Again, when we're traumatized, we have behaviors that inflict or harm us. We go to work so we can have a certain quality of life. And it's almost working backwards to fix a situation that you're uncomfortable with. In therapy, I would tell a person that they first and foremost have to create a safe place for themselves, even if they have to carve out a corner of their workspace and almost, claim that theirs, because if it's going to make them work, it's going to make them feel safe, then that's what they need to do. And then secondly, those people, instead of quitting their jobs, they need to actually be courageous enough to articulate the emotions that they feel to the necessary person. I always challenge a person when they do have a work-related situation and it's traumatizing them, to challenge that supervisor or that senior person at their workplace to not respond accordingly. And when they do that, it's amazing how much more effective things get done, instead of just calling in, like Dr. Forrest had alluded to earlier, or just quitting altogether. So first and foremost, get yourself safe. Once you get safe, then articulate those emotions that you feel. And then you can almost even then kind of start pedaling backwards and talk about some of the things that you might have lost from the racial trauma that you've experienced. And then finally, let's talk about the future and how you would like to have things look collaboratively for the greater good of the whole. But the first thing we have to do is get safe.
Thank you, Luana.
I feel like sometimes in the workplace, more than likely, there's gonna be other people that have the same sentiment as you, or that might be going through the same thing. And even if you don't say anything, even me in my own workplace, sometimes I'm like, something happened to me, and I'll just like vent about it to a coworker. And more than likely, the coworker is like, that happened to me too. And then you find your niche, and you can support each other and uplift each other. And there's a power in numbers. So if like Killingham said, if you have to talk to the right person, maybe if more than one person is coming up with the same issue, maybe something can be done about it too, you know? Because more than likely, you're not the only person feeling the way that you're feeling. It's just that everyone always think, oh, I'm the only one feeling this way. So I don't want to make anyone else feel uncomfortable. So I'm just going to stay quiet. And sometimes, in order for change to happen, you have to make people uncomfortable in order to make some type of change.
That statement's transferable in a lot of ways. You got to disrupt to make change. So appreciate that's transferable. Thank you. I'll go to the next question. We'll start with Samuel and then Monica. What are some practices that people can integrate in their daily lives outside of the counseling session into their daily lives to improve their emotional and mental well-being? So everyday activities.
Sure. So one of my favorite phrases that I would tell anybody is create as a way of coping. What does that mean? Create as a way of coping. It means that everything outside of you, outside of your physical prowess, is something that you can use to create, whether it's going to walk and think about, the day and the things that you've accomplished and the things that you've completed for your family, your spouse, your children. It could be going simply to another room to write about, things that you've been concerned about or that you've been challenged with, and literally saying, you know what, I'm going to overcome that. And actually saying that statement to yourself to affirm yourself. It could be literally, if you're a teenager, I'm going home and I'm about to go kill as many zombies as I can on Call of Duty, right? It could be as simple as that. So it's important to think about your daily activities, the daily things that you do as a way for you to really just cope with what's happening around you, and know that because you are a creative being, you can create in any endeavor in any way that you so choose. But it's important for you to realize that you have power, you have control. That's the important thing with trauma, is that you have to take your control back from the past, take your control back with the current situations that are happening into our nation and to us daily. And in order to do that, you have to control your narrative, if you can, with ways that you can be creative and think about the positive things that can come out of that. So create as a way to cope.
Thank you. I lost my mute button. I was trying to take notes because it's really good tips. Luana? Or did I say Monica? I forgot. I'm sorry. Luana? Okay. Go ahead, Monica.
Okay. Like, I'm not sure who you want to talk. So I would go along with him in regards to just taking care of you, making like a safe self-care plan, making sure you're sleeping, making sure you're eating okay, exercising, staying connected to people. What I do usually with my clients is we create a self-care box, or we call it the DBT box, and we put in things that help you with, when you want something to read or something to look at, music, videos, if it's the special candy that you like, scents, if it's a special candle, lotion, anything that helps you stay grounded and that you can find joy, anything that will improve the quality of life and what you find is happiness. If it's shopping, I always tell people, if it's going for a walk, if it's talking to a girlfriend. I know a lot of the guys are always like, I like to watch YouTube videos or play video games, but it's anything where you can go home and just do some self-care for yourself.
Does anyone else have some strategies, everyday strategies, or maybe local resources, just everyday things they can do? You raise a hand. I can hear you. Thank you.
One of the things I encourage people to do is to find a lot of activities that they can engage in that they enjoy. And I encourage them to name or list as many as possible. That way they can engage in them at any time, anywhere, without any restrictions. For example, you know what? You have the ability to take a walk when you're feeling stressed. You can do that. You might enjoy listening to some music. So whatever you enjoy to help you just de-stress and kind of recalibrate yourself. Then I encourage them to do some resetting activities that, once again, helps your mind to readjust to a situation. For example, I do what's called a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you will listen to 5 things, name them, verbalize them, if you're able to do that out loud or in your mind. 4 things, then 5 things that you can hear or listen to right away. You might be able to listen to the stopwatch or the watch on your hand. 4 things, and you just go on. But that's a way to just kind of help you to recalibrate and get some mindfulness anytime, anywhere that you feel you need it.
Thank you so much. Some things that have helped me around mindfulness is going outside every day. And I learned this when I was bringing my babies home. They said, every day go outside. You need that vitamin D, even if it's just to get the mail. You got to have one breath of fresh air. And so I garden, but honestly, I don't get a lot of tomatoes. It's really just about being outside and being in the soil and those healing properties. I also tried, I think it was you, Monica, or someone said about verbalize, maybe it was you, Samuel, saying things out loud. Because I see the memes like, oh, I'm worthy, and I say it in my head. But I recently, Kayla Morgan, so shout out to Kayla Morgan with Resilient Roots Trauma-Informed Yoga. And she had us say these affirmations out loud. And it hits a little different when you say it out loud. Like it feels more solid. And so it just kind of affirms some of those experiences. Anyone else? Every day, Luana?
Also, meditation. I know that sometimes that's not appealing to people, but honestly, it really does work if you really give it a try. And oftentimes people don't know how it works. They just can't get their minds to settle. But however, if you go onto YouTube, there's guided meditation, and it will literally tell you exactly what to do. Just Google YouTube 5 minutes, even 10, however long you want it to be, and it will guide you exactly as to what to do and how to calm your mind down in your body.
Mr. Kanya?
Yeah, and then just lastly, living in a tech-savvy society, there are a lot of apps you can download on your smartphone. There's Headspace, there's Calm, and then there's also Dailyo. If you are more of a reader, writer, visual type of learner, I would prescribe Dailyo because it almost is set up where you can journal your thoughts and feelings and then actually look back as far as maybe 3 months, as far as some of the things that you struggled with. That is for free. I do think Calm costs now. And I do believe some of the advanced features in Headspace cost, but Headspace, just to do with Luana said, the guided meditation, that is for free as well. And the reason why I lifted those apps up is because, again, when we talk about brown and black communities, and we still might have this stigma attached to mental health or this uncomfortability as far as being transparent. You could be in the bathroom at your job. You could be in your bed at 11, 10 o'clock at night, and you could have that smartphone, and you could be really grounding and detaching from those issues, and no one even knows about it.
Thank you so much. Brandon?
So as we just transition it a little bit and talk about some things that have been happening, right, in our community and the world. Recent events that have been going on have created this sense of community trauma, right? This sense of these traumatic experiences that we are processing as neighbors in many ways. And we could talk about the pandemic that's traumatic for some, or the incidents of murder that we talked about earlier related to George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. And with those experiences for for many people, there always feels like we got to do something about it, right? Like, and then you step out to try to do something about it, specifically when it's related to racism or things like that, and that can reinitiate the trauma, right? That the feelings come back, and then there's like this overwhelming community trauma or traumatic experience that you're now feeling with multiple other people while trying to do something about the same thing that's causing the trauma, right? And the question I have for you is, how does someone protect themselves from putting themselves in a worse position they were in before they started trying to fix the problem, right? So before they, if we just narrow it down and talk social justice, before they became a social justice warrior, right? Or decided that they were going to participate in protests, or decided that they were going to make it their business to educate others about, the harm that's happening, they were able to cope with the trauma a little better. And now, after putting themselves in these spaces, it's worse. So how do we create change while still protecting our own mental space? And maybe we could start with Luana.
I think everything starts from within. And just like you said, in order for you to be good to others, you have to be good to yourself. So if you're not good within yourself, how are you going to be able to help others? So making sure you're doing those daily check-ins, that you are able to be there to support others within your community. And if not, being able to realize when, you know what, today is not the day, today I'm not okay. It's okay for you not to be the social activist for one day, You have to take time to self-reflect and to give your time, your own self, to heal. Because if you're not healing yourself, how are you going to be good to others? How are you going to be able to outpour all that power and activism towards others? So everything starts from within. Always check on yourself first, and then maybe that way you can be able to be good to others.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Forrest, any thoughts? You're muted, Dr. Forrest.
How's that?
We lost you again.
Your mute button is not being kind to you. You're good. You're good now.
I always encourage a healthy support group that you can meet with and dialogue with and get some energy from them. Because this work of social injustice, it's not easy work. And a lot of times we can't see the progress that is being made. And when things occur, it's easy for the person to take it in a personal way. And we have to realize that this is something that's going on globally, and it's outside of ourselves. And then we have to be convicted to change. So we have to know at the beginning that this is going to take some hard work. It's going to take our energy. But sometimes we may not have the capacity to give all that we have. So we can take a break, as Luann had said, but know that this is an ongoing fight, and we have to be convicted to the process of change.
That's powerful. That reminds me of something we say in another setting. You can't pour out more than you have, right? Like you can't if your glass isn't full, you can't pour into someone else's glass as much as you may want to share. It's nothing there to give. That's a good way to think of it. Samuel?
Someone once told me, Samuel, you can impress from a distance, but influencing takes account up close. What that means is don't be afraid of impacting just the person right next to you. Don't be afraid of just influencing your child, your spouse, your friend, your neighbor. And maybe that's the only thing that you'll ever do. That's the only thing that you'll ever change after you've internally focused on yourself. and that's okay. See, I think sometimes we get into the social justice warring and we're like, I have to do so much, when the little that you did was a seed that changed the whole thing. So it begins to be so important that you're influencing in those one-to-one conversations with everybody that you see. That's what I would say.
That's good. I felt that thing. My hand almost went up for a second, but I'll turn it to Stacy.
That is good. So I'm going to ask one of the last questions, and then after this question, I'm just kind of prepping you. We'll go around and just last brief comments, maybe 2-3 minutes per panelist. Just any last wisdom, perspective, strategy, or tool that was not covered yet today that you just want to make sure that our community watching and those that watch it later on have that resource or that wisdom. So we'll do that after this question. So the next question is, so I know I received several requests, both post-COVID and recent events at the end of May. Stace, I want to find a counselor, but I want someone with a similar, racial, cultural background than me. Right? Like I want someone that gets it. I had several colleagues and friends say like, hey, I tried to with someone that wasn't from my culture, and I felt like I ended up giving that counselor, free diversity training. You know what I mean? So where or how can people find counselors with similar cultural backgrounds and experiences? What are some resources? Where do they go? Oh, sorry. I got to call people. Mr. Killingham.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be quick, but Mr. Davis and myself, we do represent a organization in Grand Rapids called the Urban Core Collective. That is a conglomerate of 6 agencies: Family Outreach Center, Hispanic Center, West Michigan, United Methodist Community House, Grahi, Baxter Community, and I'm forgetting one. But those agencies, I believe the Urban League, those agencies, they do a lot of assisting when it comes to those basic need life barriers, along with the mental health component. Family Outreach Center, we're purely mental health. We're right on the corner of Burton and Division. So most likely, if you do live in Grand Rapids, especially the 4950567 or 8 zip code, area code, we're not that far. We're most likely in walking distance. But then also Psychology Today, I seen Luana, Dr. Forrest, they are on there. So, and there are other clinicians and mental health therapists of color on Psychology Today. So that is also another method if a person is still struggling with that transparency component. Again, they can look those individuals up and no one has to know about it. I believe they will receive them in transparency as well. So those are 2. You have the Urban Core Collective, and then you do have Psychology Today.
Stacy, you're muted.
Thank you. I will share those 2 links in the comments later this evening to Psychology Today and the Urban Core Collective. That's really important. Thank you. Anyone else, as far as any other additional resources and where folks can find therapists, counselors with similar backgrounds? Oops. Luana and then Dr. Forrest. Luana?
There is also a group on Facebook, Mental Health Clinicians of Colors in Grand Rapids Public, and some of my colleagues here are part of that group. If you just Facebook search that and just send a message with your info or whatever, someone will answer you back. And there's a group of all of the clinicians in that group are clinicians of color.
Okay, I just want to repeat that. I'll put that link as well. So it's Mental Health Clinicians of Color in Grand Rapids. And so we can find that on Facebook. That's fantastic. Dr. Forrest, did you have additional resource? Oh, you're on mute. Try it one more time. There you go. Yep, that's it.
Yeah. People in Grand Rapids can contact Network 180. A number of years ago, they used to have what's called individual providers. And at that time, they also had people of color. So they don't have that program now, but I'm sure that they're still aware of people of color who do therapy, counseling, etc. So calling Network 180 is a good option. And also, you can look up certain therapists on the American Psychological Association website that have therapists nationally. So that's another option.
Thank you so much. So next we'll do a roundtable. We'll go through everyone like 2 minutes, some wisdoms and strategies or skills, something that you want, and then we'll give it to Mr. Davis to close us out. And so we'll start with Mr. Jones.
Sure. So my closing statement is just this, and it's really simple. Give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. Give your neighbor grace. In everything that's happening right now, there's nothing more simplistic and beautiful than having grace for yourself and having grace for your neighbor. Because when you're dealing with everything that you're dealing with today, it can be cumbersome, it can be traumatic, it can be just like, I want to give up. You know, even sometimes as a therapist, you'd be like, I want to give up. And I think that we have to honor those feelings, honor those things. And so at the end of the day, learn to have grace, learn to forgive, and learn to walk in some love sometimes, because that can be the key to helping heal some of these things that we're dealing with. That's my thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Loana and then Kirby.
Also, just to add to the resources, if you guys ever like Google like Pine Rest or Our Circle, any of those mental health organizations locally, you could request for a therapist of color, see if they have any staff available. Maybe that way you can get someone that you feel comfortable with. And also, just kind of like what Sam said, be kind to one another. There's a lot of darkness in this world. We don't need to add more of that. So just be kind to one another, be good to each other. Make sure you find a group of people that understands you, that feels you, and that you can feel safe with to vent to. You know, you don't need a therapist at all times. You can also find those people next to you to uplift each other and listen to you when needed.
Thank you, Mr. Killingham, and then we'll go to Monica.
Yeah, as therapists on this panel, our primary objective is to help people change their narratives. But again, that is for people of color, and it is for our Caucasian brothers and sisters as well. We all have to do better to change our narrative. I know there are people who can say statements as insensitive as, well, I have Black friends, or we've had a Black president before. That doesn't mean that the other 30 million African Americans are not traumatized when George Floyd occurs. We still have to do better as far as changing the narrative. And I believe part of that is going to happen when we actually really, address doing some legal reform. Those are some things that I think people of color and Caucasian people can work on together. It is something that if a person does feel uncomfortable shaking someone's hand or sitting down and having a genuine conversation with them, they can do and still be a part of the building process.
Thank you so much. Monica?
I would just want to say that most important, try to take care of yourself. Do some self-care every day. It's really important to clear your mind and stay focused on you before you can focus on and help others.
Yes, sure. Take care of ourselves. Absolutely. Every day. And it doesn't take a long time, right? Just taking like a few minutes to really breathe. I get real tense in my jaw. So I'm like, okay, relax your jaw. Just being in touch with like how my body's physically reacting to someone or some situation, right? And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be this full spa day, right? Like, but just take these moments. Although I do like this too. Next is Dr. Forrest to close us out with some additional information.
All right. It's been a pleasure tonight. And I appreciated this forum. And hopefully something like this can happen again and again. And the learned colleagues gave some really good information. It is important for us to take good care of ourselves. and to develop good relationships with other people. And that's not always easy. Bruce Kelly said, there's no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship. So make sure that your relationships with others is positive, and be willing to be committed to change when it comes to social injustice. And for us, it's important that we treat others how we want to be treated, regardless of how they treat us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague and friend, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Ms. Stout, and thank you to all of our panelists, Kirby, Monica, Luana, Samuel, and Dr. Forrest. We appreciate you so much. We appreciate your wisdom. We appreciate your graciousness. We're grateful that you gave of your time for our community. And I truly believe that something was said during this to really impact our community. So I'm grateful for that. We also want to thank our colleagues here at the city who have been so supportive of making this program happen. We want to thank the city manager as well as our elected leaders for providing us with this space. And I want to take a moment of privilege to thank Ms. Stout for her partnership in this work. So to all of the Grand Rapidians watching tonight, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you, and continue to stay engaged with the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability and the Office of Equity and Engagement as we serve you here in Grand Rapids. Thank you.
Thank you.